So now let's start thinking about that assessment information that we've talked about and taking assessment information and starting to bring it towards the design of a plan to help support individuals, okay? So one of the things that's really important when we start thinking about plan design is addressing all of the features of the problem, right? So not just the kid's behavior, that's like the smallest part. It's everything else that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to. So that means that we need to be thinking about setting events, okay? How can we eliminate setting events? Can we eliminate them? Sometimes we can, right? If we can't eliminate setting events, how can we minimize the likelihood of setting events occurring? That's why most of us had coffee this morning, was to sort of minimize the likelihood that that lack of caffeine setting event would come into play, right? Right. Sometimes we think about how might we be able to neutralize the impact of a setting event. So like maybe a setting event has occurred. Maybe a kid is sick. Well, they're sick. I can't undo sick. I wish I could, but I can't. So if they're sick, what can I do to sort of change things to sort of neutralize the negative impact of being sick? And we're going to talk about some of the things that we can actually do. So hang in. Our plan also needs to look at those antecedents, the things that trigger problem behavior. And we need to think about different ways of changing those antecedents so that they don't trigger behavior anymore. How can we no longer trigger behavior? Because again, problem behavior isn't 100% the fault of the individual, if we're going to use the word fault. It's at least 50-50, right? If I'm with a kid and that kid engages in problematic behavior, the problem is at least half mine. Sometimes it's more than half mine. Sometimes it's mostly my fault, and the very least is the kid's fault, right? So I need to think about, how do I change antecedents? How do I change the way I do things so that I'm not delivering those triggers for problematic behavior? In terms of behaviors, we also need to think about, are there behaviors that we need to teach this child, right? Does this child have not a very large repertoire of behaviors? So they kind of don't have any other options besides what's problematic. So we're going to need to teach them some things, right? It's just about skill development. And then finally, we need to think about consequences. What are we going to do if problem behavior occurs so that we don't pay it off quite so much? And what do we do when more appropriate behaviors occur so that we make sure we pay those off a whole lot, right? And we have that experience in our day-to-day lives all the time, right? You guys go to work and you get money for going to work. You guys cook your dinner and then you get to eat. Or maybe you use skip the dishes and you punch in what you want, right? That's your behavior, and then magically food arrives. It's amazing. So those are the kinds of things, right? You do a particular behavior and voila, something good happens. And so we want to make sure that there are lots of good things happening for the more appropriate behaviors that we're trying to teach. All right, so let's start thinking about some of those setting events, okay? So these, again, remember, they're the kinds of things that push you closer to the edge, but they don't make you engage in problematic behavior. They just sort of tighten the spring. So again, for lots of us, it's stuff like not having a morning cup of coffee, not having enough sleep, having a headache, having to watch your 572nd hour of Zoom something, right? These kinds of things, right? Gets to be enough after a while. So they push you closer to the edge. So when we're thinking about strategies, what we want to do then is, if we can, eliminate the likelihood that a setting event occurs at all, or make it very unlikely. Maybe we can't make it 100% that the setting event won't happen, but we can make it like 99% that it won't happen. Sometimes the setting event has happened, right? I was up at 5:15 this morning. Sadly, I'm up at 5:15 every day. That's when my partner gets up for work and I make breakfast. It's not enjoyable. But I was up, right? And the second thing that I did after making breakfast was coffee. And so I took care of that because I was tired, and I neutralized the effect of tired and made sure that I had some coffee, okay? Withhold the antecedent trigger. Sometimes the setting event is in place. We cannot change it. So a kid is sick, for example. I can't change sick. They're sick. So if a kid is sick, and I know that, let's just say, asking the kid to set the table is going to be a trigger. It's like, well, they're sick, so today I'm not asking. That's it. That's it. It's not forever, but it just means for today I'm not going to deliver that trigger because they're sick. And we do this for other people and for ourselves all the time, right? But sometimes people forget when we're talking about kids here, oh, they're supposed to set the table or they're supposed to do their homework. Well, if they're sick or they only had 3 hours sleep last night, maybe we could not make them do the same things, right? We could do things a different way for now, not forever, just for now. Sometimes we can teach individuals a skill that'll make that setting event irrelevant. So think about the coffee issue, okay? Now I have a friend and his wife needs coffee before she can open her eyelids at all. And she's extremely lucky because he gets up early every morning, he makes the coffee, and he brings it to her bedside, okay? So she gets her setting event taken care of for her by her lovely husband. But there's other people who don't have that lovely person to take care of that for us. We do it ourselves, right? I make my own coffee. Nobody makes my coffee for me, but I take care of my own setting event. And so sometimes we can teach individuals to do things that take care of their own setting events, okay? So it might be seeking pain relief. I'm not talking about young children going and getting the bottle of Tylenol and pouring out their own, but maybe conveying, right? I have a headache, can you help me? Or I've worked with adult women with intellectual disabilities who, you know, if they've got some abdominal cramps, that they can actually go and get their own heating pad and apply their own heating pad, and then they feel better. So teaching them to address pain on their own. So some of those kinds of things where we can teach a person a skill so that when they're experiencing a setting event, they can manage it for themselves, okay? The other thing that we can do is if a setting event is in place, like let's say a kid had a bad day at school. We know they didn't have a great day, so they're a little on the edge. And I ask my kid to set the table anyway. And I know he's a little edgy, but I think, you know, he can probably manage. And he does set the table. I'm not just going to say thank you, great job, like I usually do. Like I'm going to give him extra reinforcement because he did what I asked him to do despite the fact that he was on the edge. Okay, and so when that happens, when people are sort of developing the ability to cope with being on the edge, which is what lots of us as adults do, we have to cope with being on the edge and kind of be nice to everybody anyway, right? Sometimes we're more successful at it than others. But when we do that, good things happen. We want good things to happen with kids when we're teaching them how to cope like that, okay? So let's look at some common setting events, things that happen for lots of people in terms of setting events, and some of those things that we might be able to do in terms of strategies. So if you think about being tired as a setting event, you had a poor night's sleep, it's been a long day, right? You were up early and now it's late in the day. You're sitting at home watching hours of Zoom stuff, right? You're getting tired. What are some strategies? Well, can we let the person have a nap? Sometimes that's a possible thing to do. Sometimes nap isn't an option, but maybe we can reduce the expectations. So if I know you didn't sleep well, I'm going to dial down the expectations for you today because I know that you didn't have a great sleep. Can we give more reinforcement? So you're tired, but you still got up and you got dressed by yourself and you brushed your teeth and you combed your hair and here you are for breakfast. So you don't just get the regular breakfast today, you get your extra favorite breakfast today because you did such an amazing job. Despite the fact you didn't sleep well, you got yourself ready independently. Excellent, right? So those are some of the setting event strategies we could put in place for being tired. If we're talking about pain or illness as a setting event, sometimes medication is appropriate, right? Again, how many of us as adults, Tylenol if we have a headache, right? So is that an appropriate option? So I'm not again suggesting that medication is, you know, a behavioral strategy, but if somebody has an issue with pain or illness, if medication is appropriate, that could be one way of dealing with it. It's a way that many adults also deal with it. Again, if somebody is sick, dial down the expectations. If somebody's in pain, dial down the expectations. Just, you know, change what you expect today. Expect easy things rather than hard things. Expect less. Give, again, more reinforcement if desired behavior occurs. So if you know that somebody isn't feeling perfectly well, but despite that, they kind of carry on, make sure that extra good things happen for that. Because wow, like really good for you. You just kind of coped. I know that you're not at 100% today, but good job. You really did well. If lack of choice is a setting event, and for lots of the individuals that I support, this is the case. They don't have an awful lot of choice in what happens from day to day or even activity to activity, then we can look for opportunities across the day to give them choices, right? And sometimes when I say to people, let kids make choices, they immediately start thinking anarchy. And we're not talking about world-dominating kinds of choices. We're talking about simple choices like, do you want to wear this shirt or this shirt? Do you want to put your shirt on or your pants on first? Do you want to use, and I kid you not, I've used this choice with a kid before who didn't, was engaging in sort of resistant behavior at breakfast. And instead of mom just handing the kid a spoon to eat the cereal, mom would hold up 2 spoons. They were the same kind of spoon. But mom just went, do you want to use this spoon or this spoon? And the kid went, that spoon, and starts eating, right? And it's just that feeling of, I've got some control over what's happening in my life. And particularly if we're talking about kids, I mean, kids in general tend not to have a lot of control. Kids with developmental disabilities especially often don't have much control. And so even simple things like that, here are 2 spoons, choose which one you want. And kids are like, yeah, good to go, right? So looking for opportunities to provide even little choices that are really inconsequential can be really empowering in terms of, from the kid's perspective, I get to direct something that's going on. And then that can go further. That can go to choosing the order of activities, choosing what activities I do during my free time, choosing who helps me with my homework, choosing what book I read before I go to bed, all those kinds of things. So really looking for opportunities to embed lots of choice in all of the different activities that a kid does during the day. If lack of predictability, not knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, with whom it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, how long it's going to last, all those kinds of things. Those are all about predictability. Lots of times, for lots of the individuals I support, predictability is an issue. There isn't much of it. And if that's an issue, a visual schedule is immensely helpful. And again, think about it for ourselves. How many of you walk around with one of these and your schedule is in it? And if you lose that, you start to get a little antsy. One, because you can't access social media, which is like the end of the world. And second, you can't access what it is you're supposed to do next. Back in the old days of paper planners, right? I knew people who would lose their paper planners and just like their whole life was lost because they don't have predictability. These are adults, right? Adults with a whole lifetime of experience dealing with their day-to-day lives who kind of lose it when they don't have their schedules. And here we've got a bunch of kids who don't know what's happening, who don't have a lot of predictability. Let's give them some of that predictability in a way that they understand. So this afternoon, we're going to look at some examples of visual schedules so you can see some different ways of setting that up. If things like hunger or thirst are setting events, and some of you are probably now, it's 11:20, we're getting close to lunchtime. Some people have their lunch at different times. Some of you are in different time zones. Maybe it's a different meal altogether. Some of you might be feeling hungry, and you're starting to think, when do I get to eat, right? I bet you a bunch of you have some snacks with you right now. Or maybe you've taken your laptop into the kitchen and you're making lunch right now. You're taking care of those setting events, right? If you're thirsty, I bet a whole bunch of you brought drink with you to wherever it is you're watching from. And you've got those things, right? So that you can address it. So again, sometimes it's just a simple thing like if it's a kid who gets hungry fairly regularly, let's just make sure that we don't ever let them get too hungry. Let's make sure that we don't let them get too thirsty. Okay? And then ideally, teach them to ask for food or drink whenever they want it. So again, it's that kind of skill where they can manage their own setting events. If they need something, they can ask for it. Okay? So a lot of the setting event strategies, it's really about sort of thinking logically, how can I make this not an issue for you? right? How can we get rid of that issue so that we're not pushing you towards the edge? So with setting event strategies, what we're trying to do, again, is dial down the likelihood of behavior. Setting events don't cause behavior, so removing setting events or somehow dealing with them won't get rid of behavior. It just makes it way less likely because kind of the situation is a bit more favorable, okay? So that's the key thing here when we're thinking about setting events. So we want to think about prevent setting events whenever you can. If you can prevent setting events from occurring, fantastic. If setting events do occur, we'll reduce the impact of them, right? Make it so that they're not quite so impactful. If setting events have occurred, don't deliver the trigger, right? And that's usually a short-term solution. The kid is sick for a couple of days. For a couple of days, I'm not going to ask the kid to do his homework or his chores or whatever because those things are triggers. And you know what? He's sick. Let's give him a break, okay? Teach skills, right? If we can teach the kid a skill to manage his own setting events, then he's going to be able to manage those wherever he goes, okay? And then again, finally, extra reinforcement. If there's a setting event in place and the kid kind of goes, it's all right, I can deal, and they carry on and things go well, lots and lots of reinforcement for that, right? Because good for them. The conditions were not favorable and they still held it together.